I'm at Waterworks Cottages, which is just off Featherbed Lane near the Addington Golf Club on the outskirts of Croydon. In this film, I'm going to tell you how this area made world headlines in 1937, following the outbreak of typhoid. So Addington Well is in front of me, that's the main location, and we're actually going to cover some other locations that form part of the story. Some background into how the need to supply water via a well here came about. So in 1848, the Public Health Act gave powers to local authorities to build facilities for street cleaning and refuse collection and the provision of clean water. And Croydon was one of the first authorities to adopt that. In 1801, the population of Croydon was 8,000. In 1891, it was 111,000. And in the 2021 census, it's 390,000. So it was growing then, and it's still growing now. So the decision was taken to build a well here at Addington, and the construction was started in 1885. It was opened actually in 1888 by the Archbishop of Canterbury. And the original building was a masterpiece of Victorian architecture and engineering. And I've been fortunate to find not only some photographic images, but also a film from the old building that was taken in 1973. And it shows externally and internally how the operation works. I was so delighted to find this when doing my research, and thank you to the filmmaker for letting me have a copy of it to include in this film. Having enjoyed what we saw from then, we can see that there is one element still remaining. Just going to pass the camera through. So this raised area here, the steps and that round structure on top, was at the front of the original building. And that is the only remaining part from the original Addington Well and Pumping Station. The original building was Grade 2 listed, and you would have thought that would have afforded it some protection. The beam engines were retained. One of those went to Crossness in southeast London, and one went to Strumpsall, I believe, Strumpsall in Norfolk. I understand that that was part of the deal to enable it to be pulled down to create what we have today. There was a need to carry out some works here in 1937, and a period from late September to late October was selected. It was just when conditions were deemed to be right. The arrangement was for 18 workers to work 2 4-hour shifts to cover for meals and so on. In terms of getting access to the work area, they were lowered down in a skip, which is a kind of barrel type device. The men would go in there, get lowered down the shaft to where they needed to work, and then be kind of hoisted up again. Now, in January 1937, there was a tragic accident here when 36-year-old Cecil William Peat fell to his death. One of the ropes attached to the skip that was carrying him broke, and he fell to the bottom of the shaft to his death. What that actually meant in terms of this particular story is that there was a reluctance for normal workers to put themselves forward to work on the shifts to carry out the maintenance work. So they made a request for volunteers. Now the response for volunteers was pretty good, but the workers came from a group that tended to work on sewers. There were no medical or fitness tests carried out, but they were signed up and allocated to the task. Now, the provision for when workers needed to relieve themselves was as follows. A bucket would be kept in the adit underground, in one of the channels, and the workers would relieve themselves, urinate, for want of a better term, and that bucket would then be embedded into the chalk that was being excavated to keep it still, and that would be put into the skip or whatever to bring it up to the surface, and then it's emptied. The provision for more serious calls of nature was that they would request to be brought up to the surface. The skip would be lowered, they go inside, go up to the surface and answer the call of nature there. But it's not completely clear that this was always followed. You know, there may have been a lack of desire to lower the skip and get in it and go up to the surface for that particular call of nature. And it's possible that other local arrangements may have been made underground if someone needed to answer a more urgent call of nature. I'll let you read between the lines there. One particularly key factor here is that one of the workers on the site was a World War I veteran, and he was an unknowing carrier of typhoid. He had no idea. So if you put together the fact that you've got a volunteer workman there who didn't know he was a carrier of typhoid, and possibly, because it can't be proven, needed to answer a call of nature, you can kind of join the dots here and see where this may be heading. So just to recap, we've got a volunteer workman who usually works on sewers. He didn't know he was carrying typhoid, and he may have needed to use the toilet underground, and that may, and probably did, put in a chain reaction. Now, if you couple to that the fact that in April 1937 the testing had stopped, it's absolutely the worst combination. We'll come back to how this kind of panned out in the investigation a bit later on in the story. I'm walking along Sunken Road, which is on Addington Hills, right at the top. The entrance is opposite Bishop's Walk. And this is the Addington Water Tower. Get a little bit nearer, have a better view. This was built in 1923 and it holds 0.11 million litres of water. It's still fully active, obviously. Usual mobile phone masts on the top. Lots of Thames Water kind of access valve points and things. I won't pretend to know what they are. The tram line is just outside. And we've had the tram since what, 2000? So how many journeys have gone past the Addington Water Tower? Maybe some people wonder what it is, I don't know. So I'm going to carefully negotiate my way back. I say carefully, it's not too difficult. And we're going to take a walk along here. Very pleasant part of the world. Lots of bird activity, particularly now in springtime. Leaves are just starting to come out. Make it feel like we've entered a new season. And we'll pick up at the next key location. I thought it would be very strange if we didn't see a tram here. And bearing in mind the next key location is just up here, I thought, well, I'll carefully walk this path. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's not super dangerous. This is Addington Hills Reservoir. Let's just go in a little deeper. Get a better view. Now this possibly might feature in the "I've always wondered what that was" category. But this is Addington Hills Reservoir. And underneath there is something in the order of 22 million litres of water to supply many homes in the area. Constructed in 1885 at the same time as the well, which obviously supplies the water pumped up to here. Originally that was open. You could just roam over here, and the valve house building itself was, as well as a functioning valve house, so it was a tea room, a very popular tea room, and had living accommodation above. So people used to trek out here from London. It was something to do, you know, you got out of the city, get out of the smoke, and you could come out here and enjoy fresher air and have a nice cup of tea for your trouble. This location is probably why I'm telling this story. So what happened is that I was looking through some old history books and some old postcards, and I saw this quite magnificent original structure here of the tea rooms and the valve house. The valve house is exactly the same as it was. You can actually see the stonework underneath, and the building was kind of wrapped over it and above it. It's quite interesting design. But anyway, I saw this particular marvellous looking building in that context, and it said that it was a tea rooms until 1937, when it closed due to the typhoid outbreak. And then I thought, oh, well, I've not heard of that, and this is a while ago. And so I just decided to start doing the research, and that's why I'm here telling the story of the Croydon Typhoid Outbreak of 1937. So we've made our way into October. The work is finished. And on the 27th of October, the first case was reported. On the 28th of October, the second case was reported. And on the 30th of October, a further 2 cases were reported. One of the cases from 1937 was that of Richard Remington, and his father was a Bank of England employee and was determined to understand how this had happened. And he started to make his own inquiries. He went knocking on doors and did his own kind of investigation to sort of plot who had been affected and in what areas. He formed the SCTOC, which is the South Croydon Typhoid Outbreak Committee, and they became quite powerful in the scheme of things. Charles Remington informed Charles Boast, the borough engineer, and also Oscar Holden, who was on the health side of the borough. My son has just been taken to the isolation hospital suffering from typhoid. The maid from number 66 in the same road has recently developed typhoid, and a little girl from number 64 is suspected of having the same disease. The milk supply in all these cases is not the same. Shellfish and watercress have not been partaken of. The only common thing appears to be water. Now the key point here is that there was a lot of speculation that it was infected milk, that watercress was involved, shellfish that possibly came from Europe. There were a number of different reasons, and sometimes, you know, these have been linked to outbreaks, of course. But he wanted to be clear that he'd done some analysis to prove that it was the water. And he was quite firm in his convictions of that, quite rightly so. You know, his son was ill, his son who later died from typhoid. So, you know, he was motivated to do something about this. Now, on the 31st of October 1937, the SCTOC met and they invited Messrs Boast and Holden to their meeting to present their findings. And this is where it starts to get interesting in terms of the management response. So the management assumption was that there was various tests being carried out, you know, water was being treated. It couldn't possibly be the water because of that. But as we know from what we've already uncovered, that wasn't actually the case. I think Holden himself was actually distracted by the fact that a recent case in Bournemouth was attributed to milk. So it was quite hard to push him from that particular reason, or maybe we'd call it narrative nowadays, I don't know. So one resident, Ronald Moss, having been aware of the relationship between the spread of typhoid via water from his experiences in India, was amazed that Holden felt it inconceivable that Croydon's troubles with typhoid stemmed from its water supply. According to Holden, the water was tested regularly. We know that wasn't the case. So on the 31st of October 1937, Holden realised for the first time that the water hadn't actually been treated. It wasn't being chlorinated. On the 1st of November, chlorination was applied to the well. It's possible at that time that the infection had dissipated from that particular source, because the workmen had left the site on the 26th of October, but at least the treatment was applied, and that would have been sufficient to kill anything that was in there at the time. Also on that day, Holden wrote to the Ministry of Health and all general practitioners in the area to put them on warning, and there were a further 2 or 3 cases in the next couple of days. Now, the source of illness remained a mystery, officially anyway, until the 3rd of November, when Ernest T. Corneybear was brought in from the Ministry of Health, and using traditional epidemiological methods, he was able to confirm that the source of the outbreak was the Addington well. And on the 4th of November, the supply was disconnected. Now, from the 5th of November onwards, analysis took place to ascertain whether there was still typhoid infected water in homes. This took a couple of days or so, and ultimately the instruction just went out to run off all supplies that may be in any house in the area, so that they could say for sure the contamination would be washed away and the new incoming supply would be appropriately treated. The last case was reported on the 3rd of December, and the official numbers were 341 cases and sadly 43 deaths. We shouldn't underestimate the work and actually the power of the South Croydon Typhoid Outbreak Committee. They were instrumental in leading a media campaign to highlight what was going on here in Croydon. Obviously motivation from Charles Remington, you know, we've talked about already, but it kind of got me thinking, if that was how it was covered then, how would it be today? Can you imagine social media? I mean, it would blow up, wouldn't it? We'd have first-hand accounts, and we'd have people forming groups outside of the locations, and probably here as well, I don't know. But it did get me thinking that if it was such a campaign that was powerful then from effectively a residents group making noises, today it would be off a scale, I think. It was actually a big story for the world's media. It was covered in Australia, New Zealand, the New York Times. It was really a widely reported story, as you would expect. Even when the watercress story came out, that hit the headlines and affected businesses. So it was quite powerful even then. But, you know, we've seen how headline writers can draw these things to the attention of the public, and I think quite rightly so. You know, this was a real tragedy in how it happened. And newspapers and radio, and not really TV then, but certainly radio was one of the main ways of bringing this to the wider population. On the 17th of November, the SCTOC wrote to the Ministry of Health demanding an inquiry, and that was actually put in place. So I'll read to you the inquiry findings. The immediate cause of the outbreak was a portion of the public water supply becoming infected by the typhoid bacillus. This infected portion was derived from a chalk well at Addington. How that well became infected is a question that cannot be answered with absolute certainty. However, all the circumstances and probabilities point so strongly in one direction, I feel justified in coming to a definite conclusion on the subject. The conclusion is that the well was infected by the fact that at the end of September and during October 1937, workmen, one of whom was an active carrier of typhoid, were working in the well and that during this time, large amounts of water from the well were unfiltered and unchlorinated. It was an awful set of circumstances that testing stopped, wasn't recorded anyway, that through the work that was carried out, unfiltered water was pumped to the supply. And whilst all this was going on, there was a worker who was an unwitting, unknowing carrier of typhoid, who probably needed to answer a call of nature, and that would have caused the problem. I did do some research, and it's likely that it would have been the what do we call number 2 type call of nature, more likely than number 1. There's a degree of science to that, but I'll leave it there for now. In terms of the aftermath, well, there were a total of 230 legal claims issued to Croydon Corporation from spring 1938. The father of one of the survivors successfully argued his case that the water undertaker was liable. Medical expenses were paid, and there was a full inquiry from the 20th of December 1937 to the 12th of January 1938, and a white paper published in February 38. I actually have a copy, and I have to say it's been really, really useful. Oscar Holden was unaware that chlorination had ceased during the works on the well, and was accused of not notifying doctors earlier, which, you know, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But if you've got a case come in, you probably should immediately alert and in parallel carry out your investigation. Just doing my conclusion now, and I had to stop by these Thames water vans pulled up, and the guys had just wandered off. So I thought, well, that just proves, doesn't it, this is still a working site. So that's it, that's the end of the story. This tragic combination of events that led to untreated water going into the supply, picking up the infection, just from me finding some interest in the building over the back, led me to do the digging and find out more about it. So I hope you've got some value and some education, if you like, from the story. Maybe as a bonus found out a little bit more about some of these local sites, the water tower and the valve house and reservoir here. I do wish there would have been a way to retain that wonderfully beautiful building that stood there at the Addington well site with this huge chimney. It really would have dominated the landscape, but sadly, no, you know, sometimes the buildings have to go. Thanks for watching the video. Thanks for supporting the channel. Please feel free to subscribe if you haven't already, and give a little like to the video. Look after yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.